After 8 games, Ian Nepomniachtchi is 2 points behind. It's time to take drastic measures. Sergey Karjakin urgently flies out of Moscow to organize support for Ian Nepomniachtchi. Nepo completely changes his image, changes his haircut, and surprises the world champion with his first move. Let's find out what effect this had on the outcome of the game. Before the game starts, I encourage you to subscribe to our Instagram and Telegram channels for the most up-to-date content from the scene. Ian Nepomniachtchi played white and opened with c4. It was a surprise. Sergey Karjakin came to Dubai, maybe not only to refresh Ian Nepomniachtchi's image, but also to share some opening ideas. I don't exclude the possibility that the c4 move was his doing, although it's unlikely. It's more likely that Ian's team prepared a little surprise, and the surprise turned out to be successful. After e6, g3, d5, and bishop g2, Magnus goes to the combat continuation, d4. It's a space grabber, but at the same time, the objects for attack appear and there's pressure on the pawn d4. Ian plays knight f3, knight c6. There's also an option to strengthen the point d4 additionally, but Magnus plays knight c6 so as not to limit the bishop. Castles from white, bishop c5. d3 opens the way for the bishop. Knight f6, knight d2. This is not only development, but also a harbinger of a storm. Ian wants to play knight b3 to attack the bishop and then press on the pawn, so Magnus plays a5 with the idea of playing a4 to keep the knight out. But Nepo immediately plays knight b3. Here Magnus smartly retreats to e7. If we play bishop a7, then after a4 unexpectedly, we have problems with the pawn a5. We can further play bishop d2 and just take the pawn. There's nothing to hold it. Let's say castling, bishop d2. There's no bishop b6 move simply because of the c5. We move the bishop and then protect c5 first, and take the pawn. So Magnus smartly retreated to e7. The move e3 followed, which is exactly what I was talking about. The pressure is on d4. de, bishop takes e3, and Magnus Carlsen plays the knight g4, attacking the bishop. Of course, Ian doesn't want to give up that bishop and plays the bishop c5, and d4 follows. Ian had quite a long time to think about this move, but he had 1 hour and 50 minutes against 1 hour and 15 minutes for Magnus. Ian looked very fresh, moved fast, and got a good position. d4 was the right move. Even though he spent 20 minutes on it, it was a great move. The pawn does not fall behind now. He wants to play d5 at some point. a4 played, bishop e7, queen e7, and knight c5. That's another point of the d4 move. We've reinforced the knight. It can move forward attacking the e4 pawn, and Carlsen pushes the pawn on, not to give it up. There's a very important point here. Nepo hesitated and made not the most accurate move, ba, but how should he have played? There was a somewhat unexpected and risky move for b4. We put the pawn under attack. But here's the thing. After knight b4, we open up the b file, rook b1. It's dangerous to take on a2 because the knight may not get out. We play queen b3 and the knight is trapped. And if we play, say, knight c6, we can just capture b7 and white has a great structure here. Bishop versus knight. The bishop is stronger. White would have an advantage here. And the most accurate continuation for Magnus is b6. But b4 would still be captured here. On bc, the rook b5, and here's how it goes. If cd, there's the move the knight captures d4. The rook hangs, and the knight c6 threatens. The rook has no good retreats. If we took a7, then knight c6 fork. If we try rook a6, then we just capture even the knight on g4. So after rook b5, we'd have to play bishop a6, rook c5, and here white has an excellent position. Good structure. Just an advantage. Plus minus over equals, as the chess players say. The pieces in the structure are better, and it was almost a forced option. But Ian played ba instead, and this move very much releases the advantage. Magnus Carlsen plays rook d8. The knight drops back to b3 just to guard the pawn. Knight f6. Magnus is in no hurry to capture on e3. The pawn isn't going anywhere. Rook e1 is a somewhat hasty move. It would have been more accurate to play queen e2 than put rook on d1. But in the game, it was rook e1, queen e3, and queen e2. Here, white played rook e1, but Nepo could have put the rook on d1. That's why it would have been better to put the queen on e2. The rook on d1 would have been better. It would protect the pawn and prepare d5. Here, h6 followed. Magnus made an unhurried move. Ian reciprocated, h4. It reminds me of the previous game. Magnus played h3 as white and Ian countered with h4. I think you can find a certain analogy. After h6, he also played h4. Is it a bad sign? Yes, it is. But the position seems to be good. Bishop d7, knight e5, bishop e8. Magnus carefully moved his bishop to e8, protecting both square f7 and the knight. Queen e3. Of course, we expected that g4, g5 would attack wildly, but apparently there was nothing dangerous. Nothing dangerous for the champion, I mean. Here, black can take the pawn on d4, and our attack fails because black pieces are active and in order. The knight is exchanged, so it would be a complete bluff. Ian plays solid, queen e3, defends the pawn, queen b4 followed, and rook b1. There could be attacks if that knight moves. Carlsen exchanged on e5. Knight g4 attacks the queen and the pawn. Queen retreated to e1, thus forcing the exchange of queens. After queen e1, rook e1. It looks like white has a great position. The pawn b7 hangs, and most importantly, there's a threat to catch the knight. You can't defend the pawn because of f3. The knight is lost. It has nowhere to go. So Magnus Carlsen plays h5. So that gives the knight a retreat on h6, but then the bishop takes b7. The pawn is captured. The rook to a4. And there was the moment after which all Ian Nepomniachtchi fans and Russian fans were completely, totally shocked. He played c5. Yes, there was a hanging pawn. But it's not about the pawn anymore. After f3 and knight h6, white had to give up the pawn and play bishop e4, returning the bishop to the base emergently. The bishop was not at home. It was a guest. You cannot stay so long as a guest, especially without an invitation. He should have gone straight back to e4, given up the pawn. And here, white has a better position, actually. After the exchange, material is level here, but there's a hanging pawn on c7. What's so bad about the move c5, you may ask? The point is that even Magnus's face showed the indescribable horror and surprise of this move. After c6, the bishop gets trapped. Nepo didn't show up at his table for about half an hour. He was obviously trying to gather himself in the break room. He was tearing himself apart with all sorts of epithets. He must have been self-torturing. But he could do anything in this situation already. There was no way to get the bishop back. He plays f3, knight h6, rook e4. Carlsen retreats to a7, because after the exchange, the bishop would have the square a6. He plays a7 to attack the rook. Rook b4, rook b8. And the whole horror is that there are no options to bail out. For example, if we go, the bishop takes c6 and after rook b4, bishop e8, and we just exchange down. But there is a move rook b3. At best, white is left without a piece. But here, Nepo tries to provide some resistance and counterplay at the expense of the passed pawn a, but all attempts were in vain. Here, after rook d8, he captures the pawn on c5. But he could give in the way to the queen and play the knight b6. That's how he could have played the queen to win back the piece. But here is also a hopeless situation, because black has 3 extra pawns. h4 gets captured. Then the rook d5. It's a completely technical position, so Ian plays the knight c5. But after the move a8, rook finds no strength to continue the resistance, and at this moment he congratulates his opponent for the victory. And so Magnus comes out ahead with a score of +3. 6-3 in favor of the world champion, and it looks like this is the real end of the match.
May I ask, I think the question is, what happened with this mistake that you made?
No, well, actually I couldn't imagine there is actually a way which exists to blunder in this position. Yeah, like it's, the position was somewhat between like slightly better and much better during the most of the game. The biggest part. So perhaps I could play something like b4 after a3, yeah, just more a direct approach, and I think it would be like, I wouldn't rule it like as crushing, but very promising, but I guess after ba3, okay, this provides some more chances for black to hold, but still it's pretty one-sided. Yeah, but somehow, yeah, I think this bishop d7, bishop e8, black is trying to stabilize, and actually I was quite happy to find this idea queen e1 and just get a pawn into the endgame. But yeah, of course, c5 is is even funny that okay there is a way to blunder this position in one move. But Yeah, who could know?
Only in some fantasy scenarios Nepo could still save this match, so let's support the Russian challenger until the very end. And I thank you for your attention. Hit the like if you like this video. Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the denouement of the match. Also, subscribe to our Instagram channel. There, you can find all the latest news from the world of chess. Keep playing and studying chess, and I'll see you in the next videos.